I stood in the kitchen, staring at the perfectly set table, wondering if tonight would finally feel right again. 5 years of marriage with Madison, and while we had our ups and downs, I always believed that our love could survive anything. That's why tonight was so important. I wanted to remind her of what we had. The candles flickered softly, casting a warm glow over the room. Everything was in place. The wine chilled, the flowers arranged just how she liked them, and her favorite meal simmering on the stove. Yet something gnawed at me. I couldn't quite put my finger on it, but over the past few months things had changed. She'd been distant. I told myself it was just work stress or the usual bumps that happen in long relationships. Still, her late nights and vague excuses were starting to add up. I shook the thought away. Tonight was about celebrating us, not letting paranoia get the better of me. As I finished lighting the last candle, her phone buzzed on the kitchen counter. Instinctively, I glanced over. Madison's name wasn't on the screen. Instead, it was a notification from someone named Brandon. I paused. I didn't know any Brandon. The message preview was short, something about meeting soon. My stomach twisted. Maybe it was nothing, just a coworker or a friend. But the uneasy feeling I'd been carrying for weeks tightened in my chest. I let the phone sit there. No need to ruin the evening over some random text. Besides, she'd be home any minute now, and I wanted this night to be perfect. Still, I couldn't shake the creeping suspicion that there was more to that message. I glanced at the door, half expecting her to walk in right as I was debating whether to check the phone. Before I could think too much about it, I heard her key turn in the lock. Quickly, I stepped away from her phone and straightened up, putting on my best smile. Madison walked in, looking radiant as always, her black dress fitting perfectly, her hair cascading in waves. But her eyes, something was different. The warmth I remembered wasn't there. Instead, she smiled, but it didn't quite reach her eyes. The same unease I'd been feeling all evening lingered between us. "Happy anniversary," I said, stepping forward to kiss her. She returned the kiss, soft and brief, before pulling away. "Happy anniversary," she replied, her voice light but distant. Something was wrong. I could feel it. Still, I told myself this was our night. Whatever was going on, I'd figure it out later. For now, it was time to celebrate. The restaurant was just as we remembered. Dim lighting, a soft hum of conversation, the smell of wine and freshly baked bread lingering in the air. We'd been here many times, and every corner of the place was soaked in memories of us. But tonight, those memories felt distant, like shadows flickering just out of reach. Madison sat across from me, her smile forced, her eyes darting between me and her phone. I poured the wine, trying to fill the silence between us. "To 5 years," I said, raising my glass. "And many more." She hesitated, her hand lingering over her glass for a second too long before she lifted it. "Many more," she echoed, her voice barely more than a whisper. She took a small sip, but her eyes flicked down again, nervously glancing at her phone. The tension between us was palpable now, thickening with every passing second of silence. My mind kept circling back to that text from Brandon. Her behavior tonight only confirmed my worst fears. She was hiding something, and I needed to find out what it was. "So, how's work been?" I asked, trying to sound casual. "You've been putting in so many late nights?" Madison looked up, surprised by the question. She quickly recovered, flashing me that same practiced smile. "Busy, you know. Lots of new projects. Just trying to keep up." Her words felt rehearsed, hollow. I nodded, watching her closely. She was fidgeting, shifting in her seat, her fingers tracing the stem of her wine glass over and over. She was nervous. But why? The waiter arrived with our meals, breaking the awkward tension for a brief moment. Madison barely touched her food, pushing it around the plate while her phone buzzed again on the table between us. Her eyes darted to it, then back to me as if waiting for me to say something. "You seem distracted tonight," I said, trying to keep my tone light. She forced a laugh, but it didn't quite reach her eyes. "Just tired. It's been a long day." I nodded again, my suspicions hardening into certainty. There was something going on. And if she wasn't going to tell me, I'd find out for myself. She excused herself to the restroom, leaving her phone on the table. My heart raced as I stared at it. This was my chance. I reached for the phone, my hand hovering over the screen. But just as I was about to grab it, she reappeared, her eyes narrowing slightly when she saw me sitting there, her phone untouched. I smiled, pretending nothing was wrong, but inside, I knew. I had to know. The moment we got home, I knew Madison would retreat to bed, avoiding any further conversation. And just like I predicted, she yawned exaggeratedly, rubbing her neck. "I'm beat. I think I'll head up early," she said, already moving toward the stairs. "Sure," I replied, trying to sound nonchalant. "I'll lock up." As soon as she disappeared upstairs, I made my move. Her phone was on the coffee table. It took me only seconds to unlock it. I knew her password by heart. My fingers moved quickly, scrolling through her messages until I found Brandon's name. My chest tightened as I opened the conversation. The texts were short but damning. "I can't wait to see you tomorrow. Last night was incredible. I'll tell him I'm working late again. Same time?" Every message was a dagger, each word cutting deeper than the last. They'd been meeting for months. Months of lies, of looking me in the eye and pretending we were still in this together. I sat there, phone in hand, the realization hitting me like a punch to the gut. Madison, the woman I had trusted for 5 years, was cheating on me. And not just once, a full-blown affair. My hands shook as I took screenshots of the messages, storing them safely on my own phone. If I was going to confront her, I needed proof. But the anger boiling inside me wasn't the type that would lead to shouting or a fight. No, this was different. Cold, calculated. I wasn't going to lose control. I was going to make her feel the betrayal in every way possible. I placed the phone back exactly where she left it, and with steady breaths, I walked upstairs to bed. Madison was already asleep, her breathing slow and peaceful, as if she hadn't just shattered my entire world. I lay beside her, staring at the ceiling, my mind racing. She had no idea I knew. And I wasn't about to let her find out, yet. The next morning, I woke early, the weight of my discovery heavy on my chest. Madison was still asleep, her body curled up on her side, blissfully unaware of the storm brewing inside me. I watched her for a moment, the anger simmering just beneath the surface. How could she lie like that? How could she betray me so easily? I slipped out of bed quietly and went downstairs. As the coffee brewed, I thought about how I was going to handle this. Confronting her right away would be too easy. I wanted her to feel what I was feeling, slowly, methodically. I wanted her to crumble under the weight of her own lies. By the time Madison came downstairs, I had already made breakfast, the smell of bacon and eggs filling the kitchen. She smiled at me, that same smile I had once loved, now tainted by her deceit. "Morning," she said, leaning in for a kiss. I turned my head slightly, letting her lips brush my cheek instead. Her smile faltered, but she quickly recovered. "Morning," I replied, pouring her a cup of coffee. I sat across from her, watching as she sipped her drink, completely unaware of the war raging inside me. "I was thinking," I said casually, "maybe we could have a nice dinner tonight. Just the two of us. You know, celebrate our anniversary a little more privately." Her eyes flickered with something, guilt? Anxiety? It was hard to tell. But she nodded, forcing a smile. "That sounds great, Evan. Really thoughtful." "Great," I said, smiling back. "I'll take care of everything. You just relax." She hesitated for a moment, then nodded again, her smile fading slightly. I watched her closely, wondering if she was already thinking of how to cancel whatever plans she had with Brandon tonight. But I wasn't going to give her the chance. By the time Madison came home that evening, I had everything set. The table was beautifully arranged, candles flickering softly, a bottle of her favorite wine breathing on the counter, and the cake, her favorite, sat perfectly in the center. The house felt calm, inviting, as if we were still the same couple who celebrated their love with every anniversary. But I knew better. And soon so would she. Madison walked in, her smile faltering for just a moment before she plastered it back on. "Wow, this looks amazing," she said, dropping her keys on the counter. Her voice was a little too high-pitched, too cheerful. She was trying hard, and that alone confirmed what I already knew. She was balancing two lives, and tonight she had chosen me. But I wouldn't let her walk away from her betrayal so easily. "It's all for you," I replied, smiling warmly as I pulled out a chair for her. She sat down, glancing at the table, but I noticed her eyes flicking quickly to her phone, which she had placed face down beside her plate. I poured the wine, my movements slow and deliberate, drawing out the moment. I could see her discomfort growing, her eyes darting around the room as if looking for an escape. "To us," I said, raising my glass. 5 years and counting. She raised her glass, hesitating just a fraction too long before clinking it against mine. "To us," she echoed, but the words sounded hollow. We began to eat, and I kept the conversation light at first, asking about her day, talking about mundane things. She responded, but her mind was clearly elsewhere, the strain of her double life starting to show in every small nervous gesture. She picked at her food, hardly eating, her eyes constantly flicking toward her phone. As dessert approached, I decided it was time to break the silence. "Madison," I said, my voice calm but sharp enough to cut through her pretense, "there's something I've been meaning to ask you." She looked up, startled. "What is it?" I leaned forward, resting my elbows on the table, my eyes locking onto hers. "Do you believe in honesty?" Her smile faltered. Of course I do, she replied, her voice wavering slightly. I nodded, swirling my wine in my glass. Good. Because I've been thinking a lot about it lately. About how important honesty is in a marriage. How trust can't exist without it. I watched as her face paled, the tension in her shoulders rising. Don't you think? Madison set her fork down, her hand shaking just a little. Evan, what are you getting at? I smiled, but it didn't reach my eyes. I'm just giving you a chance to be honest with me, Maddie. Before I show you what I already know. Her eyes widened, panic flashing across her face. I don't know what you're talking about, she stammered, but her voice betrayed her. I reached into my pocket and pulled out my phone, scrolling through the screenshots I had saved from her messages with Brandon. I placed it in front of her, the damning texts lighting up the screen between us. Her face drained of color as she read the messages, her lips trembling as she tried to form words, but nothing came out. I saw everything, I said softly, my voice cold. I know about the affair. I know about Brandon. I know about all the times you lied to me. The late nights, the fake meetings, it's all there. Tears welled up in her eyes and she opened her mouth to speak, but I cut her off. Don't, I said sharply. Don't even try to deny it. You've been lying to me for months, Madison. Did you think I wouldn't find out? I am sorry, she whispered, her voice cracking. Evan, I'm so sorry. I didn't mean for this to happen. I laughed bitterly, shaking my head. You didn't mean for it to happen? You didn't mean to lie to me, to cheat on me, to betray everything we built together? Her tears spilled over and she reached across the table, her hand trembling as she tried to take mine. Please, Evan. I made a mistake. I know I hurt you, but we can fix this. I love you. I do. I pulled my hand away, the anger surging inside me. Don't you dare use that word, I snapped. Love. Love doesn't look like this. Love doesn't lie. She sobbed, her face crumpling as the weight of her actions finally seemed to hit her. I'm sorry, she whispered again, her voice broken. I didn't want to hurt you. I was stupid, I was selfish, but I love you. Please, let's fix this. Please. I stood up, the chair scraping against the floor as I pushed it back. I walked over to the cake, cutting a slice with deliberate slowness. The room was thick with the sound of her crying, but I felt nothing. No sympathy, no guilt. Just the cold satisfaction of knowing I had her exactly where I wanted. You're sorry? I repeated, turning to face her as I took a bite of the cake. The cake is sweet, Maddie. But not as sweet as what's coming next. Madison sat there, her face pale, tears streaking her cheeks as she sobbed into her hands. It was a pitiful sight, and once I might have felt something, an urge to comfort her, to tell her everything would be okay. But not now. Not after everything. I didn't mean for this to happen, she repeated, her voice weak and trembling. It was a mistake, Evan. A horrible mistake. I stayed silent for a moment, letting the weight of her words sink into the space between us. There was something almost satisfying about watching her fall apart like this. She had lied to me for months and now, finally, she was feeling the consequences. Why him? I asked, my voice cold. Why Brandon? She shook her head, wiping at her eyes. I don't know. I was lonely, I was stupid, I don't have an excuse. Lonely? I scoffed. You were lonely, so you decided to throw away our marriage? To sleep with someone else behind my back? She broke down again, sobbing into her hands. I know I messed up. I know I ruined everything. But I love you, Evan. I do. Please don't leave me. I stood there watching her, my heart hardening with every plea that fell from her lips. Do you even understand what you've done? I asked, my voice low. You destroyed us, Madison. You destroyed everything we had. Her sobs grew louder, her body shaking as she crumbled under the weight of her guilt. But I wasn't moved. I wasn't going to let her off the hook that easily. She had to feel the full weight of her betrayal just like I had. You think saying you're sorry is enough? I asked, my voice rising slightly. You think a few tears can fix this? She shook her head, her hands trembling as she reached for me again. I'll do anything, Evan. Please, I'll do whatever it takes to make this right. I stepped back out of her reach, my eyes narrowing. There's no fixing this, Maddie. You made your choice. And now you have to live with it. The next morning, the house was quiet. Too quiet. I packed a small bag, moving through the house silently, my mind already made up. I wasn't leaving for good, not yet. But I couldn't stay here. Not now. Not after everything. I glanced at Madison, still asleep in our bed, her face tear-streaked and puffy from the night before. A part of me wanted to wake her, to tell her that this wasn't over, that there was more to come. But I didn't. I let her sleep, knowing that when she woke up, she'd find the house empty, and the weight of her actions would crash down on her all over again. I walked out the door, the morning air cool against my skin, and climbed into my car. As I drove away, the road stretched out before me, open and uncertain. There was a time when I would have done anything to save us, to fix what was broken. But now, as I watched the world blur past my window, I realized that maybe this was never about fixing anything. Maybe this was about freedom. And as I drove farther away from the wreckage of what we once had, I realized one thing. Revenge wasn't just sweet. It was liberating. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this story and want to see more revenge tales with surprising twists, make sure to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you never miss an update. Don't forget to give this video a thumbs up and let us know in the comments what you thought about the story. We'd love to hear your thoughts. See you in the next one.